Good morning. Better? Thanks. I'm Pat Brinkman, a member of the Dedicated Offering Committee here at the UUSA, and I will serve as your lay leader today. Welcome to you, old friends and new, young and old, in the Zoom and in the sanctuary. You are an essential part of our celebration today. Whether today is your first or your 1,000th Sunday in our midst, we are stronger because you are here with us. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We're all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. Our readings today come from author and poet Ursula K. Le Guin, who many of you probably know, who wrote in Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. It's easy to say we don't need more high technologies, inescapably dependent on despoliation of the earth. It's easy to say we need recyclable, sustainable technologies, old and new, pottery making, bricklaying, sewing, weaving, carpentry, plumbing, solar power, farming, IT devices, whatever. But here in the midst of our orgy of being lords of creation, texting as we drive, it's hard to put down the phone and stop looking for the next techno fix. Changing our minds is going to be a big change. To use the world well, to be able to stop wasting it and our time in it, we need to relearn our being in it. The following is from the Le Guin poem, Tao's Song. O slow fish, show me the way. O green weed, grow me the way. The way you go, the way you grow, is the way indeed. O bright sun, light me the way, the right way, the one that no one can say, if one can choose it, it is wrong. Sing me the way. O song, no one can lose it for long. Our guest speaker today is UMass anthropology lecturer Boone Shear, who will share his thoughts on solidarity economy initiatives. Boone is involved with a number of overlapping efforts to imagine, organize around, and expand post-capitalist possibility in Massachusetts. You may know his regular column in the Amherst Indie, Becoming Human, which is a series of essays and interviews about efforts in our communities and in other parts of the world that we might learn from. Welcome, Boone.
How's this? Okay? Oops, falling down. Okay. Try it. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. This quote is attributed to the 20th century Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, who was working in a context in which revolution was afoot and fascism was taking hold. Gramsci's thinking was largely directed towards better understanding how capitalist relations of power maintain themselves, or might be transformed through culture, through cultural ideas, relationships, and practices. Today, I want to briefly consider Gramsci's proclamation, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters," with a slight modification. The dominant world is dying. Other worlds are already here and in the making. Now is the time of imagination and possibility. The dominant world is dying at multiple levels. On one level, the material natural world is literally dying. In recent decades, as is well documented, there's been a grotesque loss of animal and plant life and increasing prospects of cascading species loss, ecosystems collapse, the webs of connection between beings that hold much of life on Earth together, including human life, is very much at risk. At the same time, we are beginning to see in the public consciousness, broadly, but sporadically and unevenly, a growing critical consciousness and rejection of the dominant world, a rejection of the dominant set of relations and practices and ideas that is structuring material death. A system that Naomi Klein refers to as extractivism, viewing and treating other beings in the world as resources to be used and how much value they bring to the capitalist market. This is also what we might sort of name or describe more expansively as patriarchal white supremacist capitalist modernity. A little more than a decade ago in the United States, class as a feature of society wasn't really in the public imagination. Today, class inequalities and power are widely discussed. There is now a broadly held understanding, even if opposed by some, that racism is inextricably woven into the social fabric of the United States in every dimension, from the systemic to the individual. Capitalism is always racial capitalism. And there is an increased recognition of our settler colonial past and present, symbolically expressed in the tearing down of colonial monuments, the renaming of racist holidays and sports teams, and the increased use of land acknowledgments by institutions. And people are rejecting hyper-exploitative, alienating working conditions. We can see this from the Great Resignation to an uptick in union organizing. And people's very bodies themselves are rejecting the dominant world, as witnessed, for example, in the record rates of anxiety and depression experienced by young people. Though capitalist modernity is dying and to some extent unraveling and becoming more and more incoherent, it nevertheless continues on as a zombie, offering us violence or bare life in structuring alienated, exploitative, destructive livelihoods. What then holds in place this dying but still dominant set of relations? On a certain level, this is a question of power, and undoing the dominant order will no doubt require massive collective action. I want to suggest here, though, is that what holds us to, and maybe in particular liberals and progressives, what holds us to and helps to breathe life into the dominant world and dominant economy includes, on the one hand, our own aspirations and hopes for good, for well-being, and on the other hand, a lack of imagination and desire for other ways of being, for other economies. I'm going to try to illustrate and bring this claim forward by talking through a few recent, fairly mundane happenings at UMass Amherst, where I work. I'll then suggest some places in our own backyard where other economies, other ways of being and doing and relating to each other in the world are emerging and might be further advanced. A few weeks ago, I attended graduation at UMass, a strange but fun ceremony. It's super gratifying to see young people who have done something quite difficult, particularly students that I've come to know fairly well, receive public recognition from the institution and from attending friends and family. One of the things that I look forward to every year, the most potentially, are the speeches from graduating student speakers who are selected by each department to offer some reflective and parting thoughts. This year, though, there seemed to be a noticeable absence of critical reflection towards the conditions of the world. This was something that was immediately remarked upon by colleagues that I talked to following the ceremony. Speeches were surprisingly tempered, offering up fairly vanilla sentiments, together composing a sort of common refrain. We have worked really hard, learned so much, now we're ready to go out and make our way in the world. We wondered if this apolitical approach had to do with the increasing standardization and control of senior speaker process, or maybe this was just an anomalous happening. There had certainly been more critical speeches given in recent years. What we were in agreement about, though, was the way in which these speeches brought forward and articulated with powerful, orienting narratives of individual achievement, hard work, meritocracy, progress, and formal education as pathways towards good lives. They offered us great comfort. They allowed hope and optimism for their future to enter and permeate the ceremony and for a brief time stave off despair and hold the realities of the dying world at bay. For many students, this includes massive debt load, the uncertainties and terrors of the market, and more existentially, not knowing how getting a job or going to work makes any sort of sense at all, given that, for example, the UN's IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, predictions of runaway ecological disaster. How does any of that sort of thing make sense? Okay, so earlier this year, I was asked to participate in a workshop that had to do with the launch of UMass's carbon mitigation plan, intended to get the campus to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. Positioned as a response to the climate catastrophe unfolding around us, the workshop asked participants to think about teaching and community collaboration as part of the efforts. The carbon mitigation plan is super ambitious. It's a groundbreaking effort. It could be a model, perhaps, for other institutions and colleges, and it could possibly lead to new ideas and new collaborations. I'm all for it. What is more interesting and more impactful than the massive investment and broad support for the carbon mitigation plan, though, is what is not being imagined and discussed as possible responses to climate change, to climate catastrophe that might actually address the sets of relations producing ecological catastrophe. Indeed, carbon mitigation via sustainable development and green technology are perfectly compatible with extractivism. For example, UMass's long-standing relationship with war profiteer Raytheon includes a new course, Principles of Systems Engineering, already completed by over 5,000 Raytheon employees, and now offered to undergraduate students in the College of Engineering. In a recent announcement, the course was positioned precisely as a means towards sustainable development. And I'll read from a quote from the announcement. "The problems that society brings to engineering today require system solutions. Clean water, cybersecurity, sustainable energy, transportation, you name it. Principles of Systems Engineering," the course in question, "is the best I've seen at giving engineering students exposure to life cycle engineering concepts and processes in a teaching setting." As part of its plans to respond to climate change, will the university stop doing business with war profiteer Raytheon? Will it sever its relationship with Bank of America and its finance capital that flows towards projects where extractivism is at its most profitable? Will it end its contracts with Coca-Cola Corporation and Coca-Cola's massive pollution, production of plastics, involvement in globalized food systems, exploitative labor practices, on and on? Will it commit to giving land back to the indigenous communities whose stolen land the university acknowledges it occupies? These possibilities are not really on the table because they require fundamental changes to the dominant world and dominant economy. They would require valuing people before profit, realizing people and nature as truly interdependent, and centering care and cooperation over scale, development, and growth. What is salient here is the way in which this project, this carbon mitigation project, not only ignores these post-capitalist possibilities, but the way that it gathers and pulls bodies and feelings and energies and hopes towards a project of technological rational progress. Who wouldn't want a large institution to become carbon neutral? And like the circulating narratives at UMass graduation, it provides a bit of emotional, somatic relief for those of us who so desperately are holding on to hope, inviting and enabling us to invest our hopes and aspirations into a fantasy of a technological fix. So both of these happenings, the circulating narratives at graduation that speak to the American dream of hard work, merit, opportunity, as well as a project that proposes a technological fix to ecological destruction, are akin to what the late Lauren Berlant describes as cruel optimism, the way in which our attachments to particular narrative desires create obstacles to our own well-being. In this case, they capture our hopes for well-being, for care, for just being okay, and orient them towards and breathe life into a dying and destructive world. So what I'm getting at here is that we must truly accept with our thoughts and bodies and emotions that the dominant world, this extractivist capitalist world, is dying in order to finally lay it to rest. This requires relinquishing a certain type of hope that attaches us to and entangles us in our own destruction. At the same time, and what is indeed, I think, very hopeful, is that more and more people, young people, old people, communities, social movements, are not only rejecting with their minds and bodies and feelings and actions the dominant world as it currently exists. They are actively imagining, organizing around, defending, and advancing other worlds and other economies. In California, a community land trust has been established through a collaboration between an organization, Cooperation Humboldt, and the Wiyot tribe that seeks to return stolen land and create a process through which indigenous ways of being and knowing can be strengthened and expanded. In Jackson, Mississippi, a movement for Black liberation and sovereignty is being organized through worker cooperatives, community land trusts, and other democratically run enterprises. This is Cooperation Jackson. In Boston, the Ojima Project has created an ecosystem of care led by and for working class BIPOC residents through grassroots organizing, community-controlled finance, alternative forms of economic exchange, and participatory democracy. And in Western Massachusetts, organizations like the Valley Alliance of Worker Co-ops and the Wellspring Cooperative are advancing local networks of democratically controlled enterprises. These initiatives and many, many others are part of a growing solidarity economy imaginary and movement in the United States. Solidarity economy is quite simply an effort to put people and planet before profit. It instantiates and cultivates ways of being that run counter to or outside of extractivism by assembling non-capitalist, ethical forms of production, exchange, consumption, and relations. Things like community land trusts, cooperatives, alternative currencies, mutual aid projects, community farms, food forests, and so on. Solidarity economy values life, interdependence, cooperation, and care. And I want to close by giving a couple of locally situated examples of solidarity economy initiatives to help illustrate this, and ones that we might choose to help cultivate, and that might help orient our hopes and aspirations for well-being. Both of these are cooperative enterprises. Cooperatives are democratically owned by their members. Each member has one vote. Thus, cooperatives tend to be more responsible and responsive to local communities. They tend to be more mission-driven. They tend to be more economic and socially and environmentally just. And they tend to be more resilient than capitalist businesses. Cooperatives have a super long history in the United States with organized labor and oppressed and frontline communities, and been a means of survival and liberation for Black communities. So there's a long history, but there's been a real resurgence in interest in cooperatives, particularly around worker cooperatives over the past 10 years or so. In worker-owned cooperatives, workers are the owners and decide collectively how to care for each other, the business, and the needs and desires of the community. Worker owners decide their own working conditions, have control over their own time and space, and I think most significantly, decide what to do with profits, the world-making profits, the surplus that corporate elite used to further accumulate capital and have used to produce policies and laws, ideas and narratives that hold us to this dominant, dying world. Instead of corporate greed, worker owners can and often do prioritize individual and collective well-being and help support other cooperatives. In Amherst, Common Share Food Cooperative is nearing its 1,000 member threshold that's needed to pursue the building of its store. Common Share is taking great care to create a cooperative that is inclusive, transformative, connected to, and helps to advance the local food system and centers social justice. Among other things, Common Share is creating what they call a third space that will operate as a commons and may include things like a commercial-grade community kitchen. Common Share is a cooperative hybrid that will be governed by two sets of members, those that shop there, like most food cooperatives, as well as the workers themselves who will be owners. These structures and practices aim to enable and prioritize care, cooperation, and community well-being. On the state level, the Coalition for Worker Ownership and Power, or COOP, is bringing together grassroots organizations with organized labor and create a cooperative ecosystem. For example, COOP is advancing a policy platform that would create enabling conditions, technical assistance support, priorities and trainings, governance positions for the advancement of a worker-owned economy, worker-owned cooperatives. COOP was established in 2019, just recently, out of a meeting of grassroots organizers and activists, along with its sister organization, the Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network, the only statewide network of its kind thus far, though there are certain to be more. COOP is staffed by another organization, the Center for Economic Democracy, that was created in 2012 and dedicated to advancing visions, quote, advancing visions and practices for a just, sustainable world after capitalism. I could go on with connections of different institutions and efforts that have really sprung up over the past 10 years. A lot has been happening in the past decade in Massachusetts to build and cultivate other economies. And as the number and connections of post-capitalist initiatives and practices that prioritize people and planet over profit assembles and expands, the more we will be able to truly imagine and desire, invest our hopes in, and move our bodies into other economies and other worlds. In fact, one way to think about worker cooperatives and solidarity economy writ large is that they aspire to cultivate ways of being human, away from what economists refer to as homo economicus, the individual, rational, self-interested, competitive actor that animates market economies, and towards humans that understand and desire themselves as interdependent with other beings, as nurturing, as cooperative. And as a cultural anthropologist who is invested in a discipline that studies the range of human behavior across time and space, it is very clear to me that people are capable of becoming nearly any type of human. And this is something to be very hopeful about.
We'll now extinguish the chalice, and I'll do a reading by Elizabeth Sell Jones. Jean? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you to Brenda for our sanctuary music, to our tech team, John and Kyle, and our greeter, Libby on Zoom, and Karen in the sanctuary, and to Jean for joys and sorrows, and of course to our guest speaker today, Boone Shear. Thank you for all of your wonderful thoughts. The final reading from Ursula Le Guin. We humans appear as particularly lively, intense, aware nodes of relation in an infinite network of connections, simple or complicated, direct or hidden, strong or delicate, temporary or very long-lasting. A web of connections that are infinite, but locally fragile, with and among everything, all beings, including what we generally class as things or objects. So we admit stones to our Holy Communion, so the stones may admit us to theirs. This poem is called Marrow. I think I can say it without crying. There was a word inside a stone. I tried to pry it clear. Mallet and chisel, pick and gad, until the stone was dripping blood. But still I could not hear the words the stone had said. I threw it down beside the road among 1,000 stones. As I turned away, it cried the word aloud within my ear, and the marrow of my bones heard and replied.